It was a quiet Sunday morning on Willow Creek Lane, the kind of morning when sprinklers clicked across manicured lawns, and neighbors peeked from behind lace curtains pretending not to watch each other. In this neighborhood, nothing stayed secret for long, except for the old Harper property at the end of the cul-de-sac. The house stood still, surrounded by overgrown hedges that defied HOA regulations. Its paint had faded into a dull gray, and the shutters hung loose like tired eyelids. The locals whispered that the property had been abandoned for years, but nobody really knew what happened inside after the last owner left. Until that morning, when she arrived. Her name was Rachel Moore, a 32-year-old real estate agent with a kind of determination that could make any crumbling house look like a renovation opportunity. She had seen countless properties before, but something about this one, something about the silence that clung to its walls, felt different. Rachel had been tasked with preparing the old Harper estate for resale. The HOA had pressured the bank for months, claiming the unkempt house was lowering property values. For Rachel, it was just another listing. At least, that's what she thought. The key turned stiffly in the lock. When she pushed open the door, a faint scent of dust and old paper drifted out. Sunlight cut through the grimy windows, illuminating sheets draped over furniture. The air was heavy, as if the walls themselves had been holding their breath for years. Rachel started her usual walkthrough: photos, notes, inspection points. The house was oddly intact, frozen in time. Family photos still sat on the mantel, and an unfinished cup of tea rested on a kitchen counter as though its owner had stepped out for a moment and never returned. But then, in the study, she noticed something out of place. A small wooden desk sat in the corner, its drawers sealed shut with age. On its surface lay a single envelope, yellowed, sealed, and covered in dust. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and heartbreakingly personal. It read, "To the woman I love, should this reach you after I am gone." Rachel hesitated. This wasn't her letter to open. She turned it over, but there was no address, no name. Just a date, May 14th, 1972, and a faint watermark of dried tears across the paper. She placed it back down carefully and finished the rest of her inspection. Yet, as she locked the front door behind her, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The letter seemed to follow her, whispering through her thoughts as she drove away. By the time she returned home, she'd already decided she would go back. Something about that envelope felt alive, waiting, unfinished. And Rachel wasn't the type to leave things unfinished. That night, while neighbors fussed over their lawns and complained about parking spaces at the HOA meeting, Rachel sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through old public records. The Harper property had once belonged to a woman named Eleanor Grace Harper, a widowed schoolteacher who lived there until her sudden disappearance in 1973. The report said she left no trace. No family. No goodbye. Only a note to her sister saying she needed time to think. But where she went, or why, remained a mystery. Rachel stared at the letter's date again. 1972. 1 year before Eleanor vanished. She knew she shouldn't interfere, that this was likely nothing more than a forgotten relic. But her instinct said otherwise. She'd worked with enough homes, enough families, to know that houses remember things, even things people try to forget. And that house on that street seemed to be remembering something very old, very human, and heartbreakingly unfinished. By the next morning, Rachel found herself back on Willow Creek Lane. The street looked the same: perfectly trimmed lawns, freshly washed cars, the sound of gossip floating through open windows. But as she approached the Harper property, the air grew still. She opened the door again. Dust drifted in lazy circles as if greeting her return. She made her way back to the study and stood before the letter. Her fingers trembled, but curiosity, mixed with something she couldn't quite name, won over her hesitation. She lifted the envelope gently and turned it toward the light. A shadow of words pressed faintly through the paper, hints of a love once written but never read. She could almost feel the heartbeat of the person who had sealed it. A soldier, perhaps. Or a lover who never came home. Rachel didn't open it that day. She simply stood there, absorbing the silence, as if waiting for permission from the past. Outside, the wind began to pick up. A fallen branch scratched lightly at the window, almost rhythmic, like tapping. Like someone knocking. Rachel froze. The noise stopped. The moment passed, but her unease remained. She decided to take photos for her records and stepped outside to call the listing manager. As she reached her car, she noticed something else: the old mailbox at the end of the walkway. Its door was rusted, but inside, she saw another envelope. It was sealed, too. Different handwriting. Same date. Same words. To the woman I love, should this reach you after I am gone. Rachel's heart skipped. Now there were 2 letters. And somewhere, hidden between them, was a story that refused to stay buried. She looked back at the old house, its windows like tired eyes watching her leave, and she knew this wasn't just another real estate job. This was a secret begging to be told. That night, she couldn't sleep. The letters felt heavy in her mind, as though they carried a weight far beyond paper and ink. Somewhere in the tangled past of Willow Creek, love had been lost, silenced, maybe even betrayed. And Rachel Moore, without meaning to, had just become the one person capable of uncovering it. As dawn crept across the sky, painting the clouds in quiet shades of gold, Rachel made a decision that would change everything. She would find out who wrote those letters. She would find out who they were meant for. And, more importantly, why they were never read. Because in a neighborhood obsessed with perfection, sometimes the most broken stories are the ones that matter the most. The next morning came quietly, draped in the golden calm that only suburban mornings know. The mail trucks rolled in, gardeners buzzed across perfect lawns, and neighbors waved with smiles they didn't mean. But behind every polished door on Willow Creek Lane, someone was always hiding something. Rachel Moore knew that better than most. Her job as a real estate agent had shown her what homes really were: collections of secrets disguised as property. And now, she was standing inside one that refused to stay silent. The Harper property hadn't changed since her last visit. It still carried the scent of old wood and time. But Rachel had changed. She was no longer there for listing photos. She was there for truth. She laid both envelopes on the dusty desk. Their ink had faded, but the emotion behind those words hadn't. Whoever wrote them had meant every stroke, every pause, every tear that dried into the paper. Rachel turned on her phone's flashlight and studied the faint impressions of handwriting on the desk surface, as if the writer had pressed hard enough to leave a mark through the paper. She took a few photos, planning to run the names through public archives later. Then she noticed something strange. The first envelope she'd found, the one left on the desk, had a faint smudge of lipstick in the corner. The second one, the one from the mailbox, didn't. It was as if 2 people had written them, both echoing the same message. She sat back, uneasy. Why would someone mirror another person's words so exactly? Rachel walked to the living room, scanning old framed photos that lined the mantel. A man in uniform. A woman with soft eyes and a gentle smile. Eleanor Grace Harper. She looked like the kind of person who saw beauty in ordinary things, the kind of woman who loved quietly and deeply. Next to the photo was a medal, dust-covered, forgotten. It read, Lieutenant Daniel Harper, 4th Infantry Division. The same last name, the same home. But according to county records, Daniel Harper had been listed as missing in action. No burial, no official return. Rachel's chest tightened. It all started to make sense. The unmailed letter, the untouched house, the sudden disappearance of Eleanor a year later. This wasn't a haunted property. It was a memorial built out of heartbreak. She spent the next few hours digging through the attic. The air was thick and dry, filled with the scent of old cedar and forgotten life. Cardboard boxes were stacked neatly, labeled with decades-old handwriting. Christmas. School records. Letters. She froze at that last one. Inside, dozens of envelopes lay bundled with twine, each one addressed in the same looping script. To my dearest Eleanor. They were postmarked from Vietnam. Some were opened, some weren't. But the final one, dated May 14, 1972, was missing. The same date as the letters she found. Rachel realized the 2 letters she held weren't duplicates. They were the originals. Never mailed, never delivered. One written by him, one written by her. It wasn't just a love story. It was a conversation across silence. She took photos of everything and drove straight to the county archives. It was the kind of beige building where time itself seemed bored, but for Rachel, it was a treasure chest of forgotten truths. Inside, she requested military records, marriage licenses, property deeds, anything linked to the Harpers. The clerk, an older woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, helped her sort through the files. Daniel Harper's record was brief. Enlisted in 1969, presumed missing in 1972. No next of kin listed. But Eleanor's file was longer. After her husband was declared missing, she continued teaching at Willow Elementary. Then, in 1973, she sold the house to a trust under a false name. 2 months later, disappeared. No record of her death. No relocation. Nothing. Rachel leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. Eleanor didn't die. She left. But why? That night, Rachel stayed up late reading the letters. Most of Daniel's words were filled with longing, confusion, and hope that he'd return. The letters were never meant to be found by anyone else. They were raw and real, written in the language of a man who believed love could outlast war. But then she found one more thing. A small postcard slipped between the envelopes. It wasn't from Daniel. It was from someone else. The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant, almost feminine. It read, "Eleanor, you deserve to know the truth. He didn't die. He came home. But not to you." Rachel's stomach dropped. The room seemed to tilt, her heart thudding in her ears. If that postcard was real, it meant Daniel Harper had survived, but chosen not to return to his wife. Why would someone send that? Who would benefit from shattering a widow's hope? She reread the postcard a dozen times, searching for any hint of the sender. On the back corner, faintly printed, was a business name, Willow Creek Real Estate Agency. Rachel froze. It was the same company she worked for. The same agency, 50 years later, still standing on the same land. The coincidence felt like a chill crawling up her spine. Someone in her position, decades ago, had known what happened to Daniel Harper. Someone connected to this neighborhood. And if they'd hidden that truth once, who's to say it hadn't been buried again and again, under new houses, new owners, new smiles? The next morning, Rachel visited the HOA office under the guise of reviewing property permits. The office manager, an older woman named Linda, was chatty and proud of her decades in the community. When Rachel mentioned the Harper name, Linda's face changed. Not shocked, but guarded. She smiled too quickly, changed the subject too smoothly. And that's when Rachel knew, this wasn't just an old love story. It was a neighborhood secret. Something the HOA had quietly erased. As she left the office, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying faint whispers across the street. For the first time, Rachel noticed something strange about the Harper property from a distance. The tree out front, the oldest one on the block, had a carving. Weathered but visible. 2 initials inside a heart. D+E. And just beneath it, almost invisible under the bark's regrowth, were 3 more letters. LHA. Rachel took a photo. The moment she zoomed in, her phone glitched. Static. Black screen, then nothing. When it powered back on, her photo album was empty. Every picture from inside the Harper house, gone. Only one new file appeared in their place. An image she hadn't taken. It showed the old study desk, the envelope, and a line of text that hadn't been there before. "Don't open what was never yours." Rachel dropped her phone. Her pulse quickened. Someone, or something, was warning her to stop. But curiosity is stronger than fear. And the more the neighborhood tried to hide the truth, the more determined she became to uncover it. Because love doesn't vanish, it leaves echoes. And sometimes, those echoes become louder than the lies that tried to silence them. By the time the sun rose again over Willow Creek Lane, Rachel's mind had already replayed the same questions 100 times. Who was warning her to stop? And why was the Harper story being erased? Piece by piece, photo by photo. The neighborhood looked calm that morning, deceptively so. Joggers moved in rhythm, dogs barked behind trimmed hedges, and sprinklers hissed across lawns polished to perfection. But beneath the manicured calm of the HOA community, something pulsed, something defensive. It was as though the street itself had developed a heartbeat, one that quickened every time Rachel got closer to the truth. She parked in front of the Harper house again, her car tires crunching over the same gravel that had carried Eleanor's steps 50 years earlier. The old house sat in silence, heavy with memory, watching her like a witness. Rachel had come prepared this time: flashlight, gloves, camera, and a small recorder. But mostly, she'd come with resolve. Whatever secrets this house held, she would drag them into the light. Inside, the air was cooler than usual, as if the house had absorbed the chill of the night. The furniture stood exactly where it always had, untouched by time. The letters were gone from the desk. Rachel froze. The envelopes, both of them, had vanished. She checked the drawers, the floor, the bookshelf, the corners. Nothing. Only a fine layer of dust and a faint mark on the desk surface remained where they'd once been. Someone had been here. Recently. Rachel's skin prickled. She turned on her recorder and began speaking softly, more to keep herself calm than to document evidence. "The letters have been removed," she whispered. "No sign of forced entry. Either someone has a key or—" She stopped, listening. Somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard creaked. Rachel stepped toward the sound, careful, quiet, heart pounding. The noise came again, from upstairs. When she reached the landing, she saw it, a door at the end of the hallway, slightly open. A faint flicker of light escaped from inside. She approached slowly, pushing the door open with her elbow. It was a bedroom, Eleanor's, if the photos on the dresser were any clue. But the light wasn't from electricity. A candle burned on the vanity, flame trembling slightly as if reacting to her presence. And beside it sat a single envelope. Rachel's chest tightened. The same handwriting. The same old paper. But this one was different. It was already open. The first line, barely legible under the dim light, read, "Forgive me, Eleanor. I never meant for you to see this." Rachel swallowed hard. Her instinct screamed to leave, but curiosity anchored her. She scanned the letter quickly. It wasn't from Daniel. The tone was different, colder, written in a voice that sounded guilty. It mentioned the deal, the neighbors, and keeping the truth quiet for the good of the community. This wasn't a love letter. It was a confession. Rachel folded it carefully and slid it into a folder. Whatever this was, it connected Daniel and Eleanor's tragedy to the HOA's origins. The perfect neighborhood had been built on something rotten. She turned to leave but noticed something strange in the mirror. Her reflection wasn't quite right. The candlelight behind her shimmered oddly, like water rippling. And for a fleeting second, she saw movement, a shadow of a woman standing near the dresser, her hand resting gently on the vanity. Then it was gone. Rachel stepped back, heart racing. The flame flickered once, then went out. The house sank into silence again, and the air grew heavy with dust and old perfume. She hurried downstairs, locking the door behind her. But before she could reach the street, she saw someone standing by her car. Linda, from the HOA office. Her smile was too bright, her posture too deliberate. "You're working hard on that property, Rachel," she said, tone polite but edged with warning. "We've received reports. Neighbors think someone's been trespassing." Rachel tried to sound casual. "I'm just cataloging the estate for the sale. Doing my job." Linda nodded, but her gaze stayed fixed on Rachel's hands, the folder she was clutching. "Some stories are better left buried," she said softly, before turning and walking away. Rachel watched her leave, the words sinking like stones. Linda wasn't just suspicious. She was involved. That night, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. From her living room window, she could see the faint outline of the Harper house across the street, its upstairs window faintly lit even though no one lived there. She turned away, but her phone buzzed. A new email notification appeared, from an address she didn't recognize. Subject line: "You're looking in the wrong place." Attached was a photo. It showed the inside of the Harper attic, the same space Rachel had searched, but this time, a hidden panel was visible in the wall. She hadn't seen it before. The message body contained only one sentence: "Check behind the metals." Rachel grabbed her keys and coat, ignoring the late hour. The street was silent except for the hum of streetlights and the rustle of trees. Inside the house, she moved straight to the living room. The medal she'd seen before, Daniel Harper's, still hung above the fireplace. She reached up, fingers brushing against the cool metal, and tugged. It came loose easily, revealing a small compartment in the wall. Inside was a tin box, rusted but intact. She placed it on the floor and pried it open. Inside were photographs, Eleanor and Daniel, smiling, soldiers in uniforms, and one image that made her blood run cold. A group of people standing together in front of the half-built neighborhood sign. "Welcome to Willow Creek Estates." And among them, Linda. Younger, but unmistakable. The same eyes. The same smile. The HOA manager hadn't just worked in the neighborhood for decades. She'd been there from the very beginning. Beneath the photos lay one final envelope. It was sealed with wax, marked simply, HOA Records, Confidential. Rachel stared at it, realizing this was bigger than one love story. The letters had been part of a cover-up, a way to rewrite what happened when the community was founded. The HOA wasn't protecting property values. They were protecting their secrets. But before she could open the envelope, the sound of footsteps echoed from the porch. Slow. Deliberate. She turned off her flashlight and backed into the shadows. The front door creaked open. A beam of light swept through the room. Someone was inside. The box was still open in front of her. The envelope glowed faintly in the light. The footsteps came closer, measured, confident, as if the intruder already knew the layout of the house. Rachel held her breath. She could see a silhouette now, tall, composed, moving toward the fireplace. Then, a whisper. "Put it back, Rachel." Her pulse froze. It was Linda. Calm. Controlled. Standing exactly where Eleanor's photograph once hung. Rachel didn't move, didn't speak. Linda stepped closer, her flashlight glinting across the room. "This neighborhood was built on peace," Linda said softly. "Let's not disturb the dead." The words hung in the air like smoke. And then, before Rachel could respond, Linda reached out and blew out the candlelight that had somehow relit itself on the mantel. Darkness fell. When Rachel opened her eyes again, she was lying on the front lawn. Her car door was open. The box, the letters, the envelope, gone. Only one thing remained in her hand. A single scrap of paper. It read, "He never loved her. He loved the house." Rachel sat up, dazed, the morning sun already breaking through the clouds. Somewhere behind her, the Harper house stood still again, as though nothing had happened. But she knew now, it wasn't just haunted by memory. It was alive with it. And whatever it remembered, it wasn't done telling its story. Rachel couldn't sleep. The Harper house loomed in her mind like a monument to secrets, silent yet insistent, insisting that she see what everyone else on Willow Creek Lane had ignored or worse, deliberately covered up. The letters, the photographs, the confiscated envelope, they weren't just personal relics. They were evidence. Evidence of a story the neighborhood had buried long before Rachel was born. She decided that morning to start where the truth had begun. The neighbors. Willow Creek Lane was the kind of place where everyone's business was considered public knowledge, even when it wasn't. Perfect lawns and white fences didn't just signify order, they signified vigilance. And Rachel knew that if she wanted answers, she needed to unravel decades of collective discretion. Her first stop was the oldest resident on the street, Mrs. Carmichael, whose family had lived in the same house since the 1950s. She was sharp, her eyes misted with age but piercing in their clarity, and she greeted Rachel with a slow nod. "I hear you've been snooping at the Harper place," Mrs. Carmichael said without preamble. Her voice was soft, but it carried authority, like a courtroom judge who had seen too many trials. Rachel smiled cautiously. "I'm trying to understand the history of the property. Eleanor Harper. Her letters. Everything." Mrs. Carmichael's lips pressed together. "History is convenient. Stories, even more so." Rachel leaned in. She could sense the older woman was on the edge of confession. "I need to know what really happened. I found letters. They were personal, important. I can't just leave it like that. The older woman sighed, settling into her chair. You don't know what you're opening, girl. This neighborhood, this street, was built on more than lawns and quiet streets. It was built on promises. Promises that were never meant to be broken. Rachel's pulse quickened. What kind of promises? Mrs. Carmichael took a moment, staring out the window. After Daniel Harper went missing, Eleanor Grace Harper was left with her grief. She trusted people, neighbors, friends, people in power. But what she didn't know was that some of them had already decided the future of this street. They made a pact to protect each other, to protect the neighborhood, and to protect themselves. Rachel frowned. A pact. Exactly that. A pact, the woman confirmed. Eleanor Harper's letters, her hopes, her grief, it didn't matter. The people who ran the neighborhood, who eventually became the HOA, they needed to control the narrative. A missing soldier, a grieving widow. It wasn't a story that could stay messy. So they hid it, made the house disappear from public attention, made sure no one ever questioned why Eleanor vanished, why the letters never reached Daniel. Rachel's stomach tightened. She could feel the weight of decades pressing down on her. These weren't small lies. These were carefully constructed silences that had shaped the entire street. And the letters, she asked. Why were they hidden? Mrs. Carmichael's eyes glinted. Because some truths are dangerous. Because some love stories threaten to undo the order people fight so hard to maintain. If Eleanor's letters reached anyone, it would expose the pact. That's why your little discovery has ruffled feathers. Rachel nodded slowly, piecing it together. The HOA wasn't just an administrative organization. It was a network of families, neighbors, and individuals bound by unspoken agreements. Their collective silence had allowed Eleanor's story to vanish, leaving only rumors and faded photographs. She knew then that Linda, the HOA manager, was a living part of that pact. She hadn't simply inherited a job. She had inherited a legacy, one that required enforcing secrecy and ensuring that the neighborhood maintained its perfect appearance at all costs. Rachel left Mrs. Carmichael's house, her mind racing. She understood the stakes now. Uncovering the Harper story meant challenging a legacy, risking reputations, and disturbing decades of carefully maintained control. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over Willow Creek Lane as she walked past rows of identical homes. Each one seemed to watch her, each one a silent witness to promises made long ago. And in every shadow, she could feel Eleanor's absence, a story that had been silenced by the collective will of neighbors more concerned with appearances than truth. Determined, Rachel returned to her office. She pored over the photographs and documents she had managed to save, comparing faces, dates, and connections. Every element pointed to the same conclusion. The neighborhood's founding families had acted in unison to erase a tragedy. Their pact had ensured that no one, not Eleanor, not Daniel, and certainly not the public, could challenge their version of reality. And yet, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that some of the neighbors, those who remembered, those who had lived through it, still carried fragments of truth. If she could reach them, coax them to speak, she might finally piece together the real story behind the Harper letters. Her investigation took her from home to home, asking subtle questions, observing reactions, piecing together half-truths buried in decades of social etiquette. Every evasive glance, every polite smile, every hurried explanation revealed something more. The network of silence was strong, but cracks were appearing. Small gaps that only a determined outsider could exploit. By the end of the day, Rachel had accumulated enough circumstantial evidence to know that Eleanor Harper's love story had been sacrificed for the sake of order, control, and appearances. And the weight of that realization settled heavy in her chest. Uncovering it would not be simple. She would face resistance, scrutiny, and perhaps intimidation. But she also understood something else. The letters, the true emotions contained within them, deserved to be heard. And Rachel Moore had never been the type to ignore a story that demanded justice. As she left the neighborhood, the Harper house came into view once more. Its facade appeared ordinary, lifeless, but she knew better. Every wall, every corner, every piece of furniture had absorbed a history of sorrow, longing, and betrayal. The house remembered. It had witnessed Eleanor's love, Daniel's absence, and the neighbors' pact. And now, Rachel was about to confront it all. The night descended on Willow Creek Lane, quiet and serene to the casual observer. But behind closed doors, in rooms both old and new, the truth was stirring. The letters, the pact, the secrets, they were not finished. And Rachel Moore, whether she knew it or not, had become the catalyst to unravel them. Rachel returned to the Harper house the next morning, determined to uncover what had been hidden for decades. The neighborhood was quiet, almost suspiciously so. Cars were parked perfectly along curbs, sprinklers paused mid-spray, and through lace curtains, shadowed eyes seemed to follow her every move. Willow Creek Lane thrived on appearances, and appearances were carefully maintained, by any means necessary. The Harper house, as if aware of her determination, welcomed her with the scent of aged wood and dust, the quiet hum of memories long abandoned. Rachel moved straight to the living room, scanning each piece of furniture, each artifact, each photograph as if the house itself might whisper the secrets she sought. She was searching for the letters, for anything that could illuminate the story. The envelope in her folder had led her here, but she sensed there was more. Eleanor's story was incomplete. Daniel's silence was incomprehensible. And the HOA's involvement, hinted at by Linda's warnings and Mrs. Carmichael's confessions, suggested a conspiracy far deeper than she had imagined. Rachel's eyes fell on the fireplace. She knelt, running her fingers along the base where the hidden tin box had been removed. Something had been left behind, a scrap of paper, folded and almost invisible under the dust. It read, "For the one who seeks the truth, follow the path of memories, and you will find what was never lost." She turned to the staircase, realizing the attic had more to reveal. The trapdoor creaked as she lifted it, revealing the same hidden compartment she had seen in the photo from the mysterious email. This time, however, she approached carefully, pulling down the wooden panel to reveal a small, leather-bound journal. The handwriting inside was unmistakable, Eleanor Harper's. Rachel settled on the floor, her heart pounding, and began to read. The pages revealed Eleanor's thoughts in the days after Daniel's disappearance. She described longing, hope, grief, and confusion. Each page breathed life into the story Rachel had pieced together. The letters, the hidden photographs, the neighbor's silence. Eleanor wrote of Daniel's absence, of her days teaching children while dreaming of his return. She described the neighbors' offers to help, their polite assurances, and the subtle ways they warned her to move on and maintain normalcy. What Rachel realized now was chilling. The HOA, or the community that would become it, had begun as a network not just for maintaining property values, but for controlling the narrative of loss. Daniel's letters, Eleanor's journal explained, had never reached her because the neighbors had intercepted them. Their intentions, according to Eleanor, had been justified as protection, but the effect had been devastating. Eleanor's love, which could have endured even separation, had been sabotaged by the very people sworn to support her. Rachel turned the pages, and then she found something even more astonishing, a series of folded letters bound together with twine, tucked between journal entries. These were Daniel's words, letters never mailed, never read by Eleanor until now, but kept here, in this hidden space. She unfolded one and read, "Eleanor, my love, I am alive. I am coming home. But I fear what I will find. The neighborhood. It is not what I imagined. You will not believe what I've seen. Wait for me, but protect yourself." Another letter revealed that Daniel had returned briefly, but found Eleanor gone, convinced she had left him. The neighbors had seen him, had known the truth, and had chosen to maintain their own order rather than restore love. Rachel's mind reeled. The HOA, the legacy of Willow Creek Lane, had been founded on deception, a careful erasure of both Eleanor's grief and Daniel's return. Love had been sacrificed to control, to appearances, to the illusion of peace. She gathered all the letters, photographs, and the journal, her pulse quickening. The full story was here now. Eleanor's despair, Daniel's absence, the neighbors' calculated interference. It was not just a love story. It was a testament to the consequences of silence, secrecy, and control. And now, decades later, Rachel held the truth in her hands. The weight of it pressed on her as she stepped outside, the sun low in the sky, casting long shadows across the street. She knew that exposing the letters would shake the neighborhood. The HOA's carefully curated reputation, built on decades of mutual silence, would be challenged. Yet she felt no hesitation. Eleanor's love, Daniel's letters, the injustice, it deserved to be heard. As Rachel drove home, she reflected on the nature of truth and memory. Willow Creek Lane, with its manicured lawns and obedient sidewalks, had hidden a story for 50 years. But stories, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of resurfacing. They find the people willing to uncover them, willing to confront the inconvenient truths, willing to restore what was lost. That evening, she began to organize the letters, scanning and documenting each one. She photographed every page, every mark, every fold, determined to preserve Eleanor and Daniel's story in a way the neighbors could not suppress. And as she worked, Rachel realized that the letters themselves had a life beyond the paper. They were a bridge across time, connecting her, a modern observer, to a love that had been silenced. They were voices from the past, demanding recognition, demanding that someone remember. By the time night fell, Rachel had prepared everything. She felt a mixture of fear and resolve. She knew that presenting the story to the public, even just to the world of Willow Creek Lane, would not be simple. The HOA, Linda, and the remaining witnesses of the original pact would resist. But Eleanor and Daniel's story was too important to remain hidden any longer. The letters, bound together with decades of secrecy and sorrow, rested neatly in a folder. Rachel looked at them, and for a moment, she could almost hear Eleanor's voice, soft but insistent. Do not let them forget. Do not let them erase what love endured. Rachel understood. This was bigger than her career, bigger than property values or neighborhood gossip. This was about justice, about truth, about love that had survived betrayal and silence. And she would make sure the world knew it. The morning air on Willow Creek Lane was crisp, carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass and the faint hum of sprinklers. For decades, this street had thrived on appearances. Perfect lawns, trimmed hedges, and the unspoken understanding that no one questioned the neighborhood's pristine order. But today, that order was about to be disrupted. Rachel drove slowly toward the Harper house, the folder of letters resting on her lap like a fragile heartbeat. She knew what she carried, decades of unspoken love, heartbreak, and betrayal, but she also knew why she had to deliver it. Eleanor's story deserved closure, Daniel's devotion deserved recognition, and the neighborhood, for all its power, could no longer hide behind silence. As she approached the house, she noticed neighbors peeking through curtains, their eyes wary, curious, and perhaps anticipating disruption. She parked and stepped out, folding the letters gently, the leather-bound journal tucked under one arm. The weight of the past pressed on her chest, but determination drove her forward. Rachel entered the house, the familiar scent of dust and old wood welcoming her back. She moved to the living room, setting the folder on the desk where the letters had first been found. She had spent weeks preparing, photographing, documenting, and organizing the letters in chronological order, revealing the progression of Eleanor's longing, Daniel's absence, and the community's deliberate interference. It was time to make it public, not just for her own curiosity or satisfaction, but for truth itself. The first person she called was Linda, the HOA manager. Rachel's voice was calm, precise, and unwavering. She informed Linda that she had discovered Eleanor Harper's letters, Daniel's unsent messages, and evidence of the HOA's cover-up, the decades-long suppression of the story. Linda's silence on the other end of the line was telling. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured, trying to maintain authority. Rachel, some stories are better left forgotten. The neighborhood functions best when peace is preserved. Rachel's response was firm. This isn't about peace. It's about love. It's about truth. The letters were never meant to be hidden, and the story was never meant to die. The people who lived it, the people who suffered, deserve acknowledgement. Eleanor and Daniel deserve acknowledgement. For the first time, Rachel sensed hesitation from Linda. The carefully maintained armor of the HOA's authority faltered. The decades of secrecy had depended on silence and fear, and Rachel's resolve was breaking it. By midday, Rachel had convened a small community gathering at the Harper house, inviting neighbors who were willing to witness and hear the truth. She displayed the letters and journal on the desk, turning the room into a temporary museum of love and loss. Photographs were hung carefully on easels, and the chronological order of correspondence allowed the story to unfold organically, page by page, word by word. Neighbors arrived cautiously, some curious, some skeptical, others defensive. Rachel spoke clearly, narrating the story of Eleanor and Daniel Harper without embellishment. She described Daniel's deployment, Eleanor's waiting, the intercepted letters, the neighbors' pact, and the deliberate silencing that followed. The room grew quiet as the gravity of the revelations settled over everyone present. Those who had known fragments of the truth, those who had been part of the original pact, shifted uneasily. They realized that decades of silence could no longer protect them from the consequences of their choices. One neighbor, older than the rest, finally spoke. Her voice trembled as she admitted, "We thought we were protecting her, protecting the neighborhood. We never imagined it would be remembered this way." Rachel nodded. "You were protecting appearances, not people. Love and grief don't vanish because we choose to ignore them." Eleanor Harper waited, Daniel Harper returned, and yet their story was stolen. Today, that changes. Letters were distributed, photographs examined, and the journal read aloud. Eleanor's words, Daniel's words, their hopes, fears, and devotion, long buried by silence, finally breathed in the open air of Willow Creek Lane. By sunset, the story had been acknowledged by all present. Some wept openly, some bowed their heads in shame, and some simply stood silently, realizing that their legacy had been intertwined with injustice. Rachel observed quietly, feeling a bittersweet satisfaction. The letters had been delivered, the truth had been revealed, and the story that had haunted her since the first envelope would no longer be ignored. Later, as the street settled into evening, Rachel walked back to her car. The Harper house stood quiet, its presence no longer oppressive but dignified, as if relieved that its story had finally been heard. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced across the lawns. Shadows that had once hidden secrets now illuminated by truth. Rachel glanced at the letters in her folder one last time. Eleanor Harper's love had survived deception. Daniel Harper's devotion had endured absence. And the neighbors, finally confronted with the consequences of their silence, understood that peace built on lies could never compare to justice built on truth. As she drove away, Rachel reflected on the nature of stories, memory, and love. The letters she had delivered were more than paper and ink. They were bridges across time, reminders that some truths, no matter how carefully buried, will always find a way to be heard. And somewhere in Willow Creek Lane, in the quiet of the Harper house, Eleanor and Daniel's love finally rested, acknowledged, and immortalized. Not in secrecy, but in the hearts of those willing to see and remember.